I was just going to say, it's like it's one thing to kind of talk about cosmology explicitly, and to say like, oh, well, like my story is actually that everything matters and that I'm inherently worthy and that life is sacred, and
Mm.
that's my cosmology. It's like, so there's this saying that it's like, don't tell me what you believe, tell me what you do for 24 hours a day, and I'll tell you what you believe. you know,
Yeah, so
and
that
so
was, keep going.
just to say like to think that we can um, with like the flip of a switch transport ourselves out of a an impoverished defunct cosmology and in its place like insert like install a new program that's like this makes everything good and better. It's like obviously that's part of it is like consciously bringing in new beliefs and new stories, but um, there's a complexity there that I think is even hard to talk about in terms of how the story gets told, how the story gets perpetuated culturally, but also just in terms of our like immediate kind of material reality. Like the fact that like I have to get in a car and drive to buy some of my food at the grocery store, like that reinforces a certain type of story. That
Really well said. And
so,
so there's something just a little longer, like there's something there, like even just gathering together as men, because you're talking to the complexity of the story of the way that we build stories and maintain stories, that it's not as simple as sort of going down into the cellar and rooting out the old story and replacing it. And that if you think you have, you maybe don't totally understand. It's not, I'm not saying you couldn't have done that and that that's not
uh,
possible, but that there's a kind of, and certainly with major visionary experiences, a lot of that does happen at the core level,
uh,
but that by and large, there's a kind of complexity to and a perniciousness to the way that these stories are kind of pervaded up and down the stack. But that like, and because, but then there's also a benefit to that because it means that we don't need to only go down into the basement in order to uproot the story, but that something like a men's group, like I'm going to gather with men and share my feelings as if they're not trying to compete with me for resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but are just here on a kind of new story, a new basis, a new reason for wanting to spend time, that we all want to do this together, uproots a tendril of the story that has said like all the things about why I shouldn't trust men, all the reasons, what reality is, what culture is. And so all of that is disconfirmed for a moment when I
mm-hmm,
gather with men. So that's one way. And so I don't know if you want to, so I was just, just sort of piggybacking on that idea of
mm-hmm,
the problem and the opportunity.
yeah, yeah. I think that's really well said, Peter, and I think that it's almost like there's a disruption of the myth of individualism in there where it's like, well, I'm gonna like lift myself up by my own bootstraps and I'm gonna will a new story into being. And it's like actually if you're really gonna step into this other paradigm of interbeing, interconnectivity, you can't do it alone.
Mm.
You actually need to join hands with your people, your brothers in such a way that like what you need is actually like you can put yourself in the way, like you can make yourself available to the kind of support that you need to really create those deep kinds of changes, but you can't do it alone. You actually have to do it with other people, other men. Um, so I think that's like that feels really, really core. Actually, the one of the promises of something like a men's group, something like an embodied men's group, is the opportunity, not just to show up as an individual and to like do your own individual work, but to show up and to be actively transformed by virtue of being in a space that allows for something new to exist and something new to emerge.
It speaks back to our previous conversation we just had about not being able to make, for example, our men's program or anything that a man wants to do that he really senses is worthy of his soul, and like to, a prayer almost. It's almost like it's almost like, I mean, this is the thing that I quoted before. Martinez is, the one that wants it can't have it. Like the one that wants
Uh-huh.
the story out so that the new story of inner being or connection and aliveness and sort of knittedness with all of life cannot be installed by you, the one who is attempting to deinstall it on your own, because in doing that you perpetuate the other story that you are separate and that those things don't exist. So how could you possibly do that? You have to kind of let go of that one of you that wants to have that experience, kind of fall back into this trust fall of like, oh, I'm ugly and I'm weird and I'm weak. It's like the last sort of insults of the old story as you fall back into the arms of your brothers is like, you're weak and you can't do it and you're not worthy and you're alone. And it's just like, yep, willing to feel all of that as I am kind of caught in this a weaving of a new basket that can hold you, that could be maybe some part of this bigger story if it's done right.
Yeah, as you were speaking, it's like almost feels like this, like that's the birth canal. That's the sort of like impossibility, you know, the like the sort of constriction that happens as the baby is moving into the birth canal, or it's like this is the end. There, like this is death. You're like being crunched, and then there's some sort of mysterious miracle that happens where it's like you emerge and you take a breath and you're separate but connected, and like yeah.
So good. Well, careful what we wish for, right?
Yeah.